Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here to give you another video, but this time not to improve your chess game, maybe to just help you learn a little bit more about chess. I recently finished reading International Master Danny Rensch's book, Dark Squares, and I corresponded with Danny, and he said, could you make a video about your review of the book? And I said, sure. So here we are. First thing I want to show you about the book is the corner of my book. You can see it's well eaten by my dog Kappa. So when they say it's a dog-worn or dog-turned book, mine is literally that way. Anyway, when you're doing a nonfiction book review like this, you don't want to give away too many spoilers, but it's not a fictional book. So if you want to read the book about, it's called Dark Squares, How Chess Saved My Life is the subtitle. If you want to read the book and you don't want to know anything about the book, then this is probably not the video for you, because in order to review the book, I need to go through some of the things that are in the book and some of my comments about them. All right, so there's basically three parts to the book. The three main plots in the book are: one, Danny was born into a cult in northern Arizona. Two, Danny eventually got involved with the start of chess.com, and of course now is the face of chess.com, which is the biggest chess website, web portal in the world. And thirdly, about cheating in chess, and in particular, what happened with regard to Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen. So when the book opens up in the prologue, Danny's getting a call from Magnus Carlsen's father about Magnus Carlsen's game at the Sinquefield Cup a few years ago, where he played Hans Niemann and Hans Niemann beat him. And the accusation was that possibly Niemann was cheating, and they wanted to know from Danny what chess.com knew about Danny's past involved with, sorry, not Danny's past, but Hans Niemann's past involved with chess cheating. And that's how the book opens, but that's just the prologue, and then you have to wait till the very end of the book to continue with what's happening in the prologue. So the book really starts out with Danny explaining about how the cult came to be. I think the name of the cult is something like the Church of Immortal Consciousness. But the people living inside the cult in northern Arizona up in the mountains, they just called themselves the Collective. And how did this cult start? Well, there was a person named Trina Kemp, and she had apparently gotten this visitation from a 15th century Dr. Duran, who had, told her about his philosophy. So she would go around holding like seances and had trances and pulling up the spirit of Dr. Duran for the cult, and, talking for Dr. Duran and explaining to the people about his philosophy of life, and the people would buy into this and move into their area in northern Arizona. And the cult is, like a lot of cults, the people controlling it are very much in control. In fact, the kids are not always staying with their biological parents, and this becomes a big part of the book, because once Danny gets a chance to watch Searching for Bobby Fischer and starts to fall in love with chess, the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, he starts doing it. And because you're in a cult, the cult can encourage things like this. Like if they think that their kids are going to be good at chess, they don't have to worry about, what's going to happen. They could 100% put the kids toward chess. And to some extent, that's what they did with their elementary school team. And Danny was kind of the leader of this elementary school team that became a junior high school and high school team. And because they could study chess night and day and do all kinds of crazy things involved with chess, they got a tremendously good chess team that did very well at the state and national levels. And Danny kind of became the leader, and he was like the prodigy. And this led to the cult people actually deciding to take him away from his mother. So they actually moved him to other people, like the cult leader and the cult leader's right-hand man, which was Danny's biological father, but he wasn't living with his mother. Long story, of course, you read the book. But they ended up taking Danny away from his mother. It was very traumatic for both of them. And they were trying to groom Danny as being like a chess guru. For his part, Danny bought into this It wasn't like he was rebelling against this. He bought into this. He thought he was going to be like a chess savior. And one of the things he wanted from the time he was young was he noticed that chess players were very poor compared to other people who were really good at things, like top musicians or top tennis players or top golfers. The grandmasters were always scrapping for a living. Maybe the top couple, 2 or 3 in the world did fine, but most of the grandmasters were very poor. And they actually brought in a grandmaster, Igor Zaitsev, to be like Danny's personal coach. And he worked with Igor Zaitsev for quite a while to become a good chess player. In any case, Danny wanted to do something. He wanted to become a grandmaster. He wanted to become the guru. He wanted to become the guy who saved chess and brought chess to where it would be in prominence. But he thought he would do that by like becoming world champion and leading people out of the dark. Well, I won't go into the details of what happened, but eventually in 2008, Danny went to an international tournament and he met, let me write here the names, he met Eric Olabest and Jay Severson, who had bought the chess.com domain name and were programming it, and they had bought it for, believe it or not, $56,000. Now, one of the ideas of the book is that what happened to chess.com? Eric and Jay, were not really serious chess players. They loved chess, obviously, or they wouldn't have done this. But they really didn't have the same kind of vision that Danny did. And Danny went up to them and he kind of proselytized his vision to them, and they were very turned off by that. And originally, Danny didn't get involved directly, but eventually he did, of course, and he worked his way up into their organization because he really wanted to work really hard and he had the vision of what chess.com could be. And Danny goes into a lot of detail in the book about how the Internet Chess Club, ICC, was the dominant force at that time, and how what their philosophy was, and how chess.com's philosophy was different from ICC, and what chess.com did differently than ICC to try to draw people away, and how things went from like the early 2000s where ICC was dominant into the 2010s where chess.com started to take over and even become more dominant. Now, I have a part in all this because when ICC became big, they had a radio station called Chess FM, and it was run by a guy named Tony Rook. And because I'm a chess master and also it was a chess tournament director and a chess tournament organizer, and I was involved with things like the rules committee, and I knew chess history, I could pretty much answer any question anybody had about chess in general. So I went to Tony Rook and I said, Tony, I can do this. And Tony said, okay, we can give you a radio show. And I said, I'm sort of a Renaissance man. I know a little bit about everything. I can answer anybody's questions. So that's what they called the show. They called my Chess FM show Ask the Renaissance Man. And I did that for several years on Chess FM via ICC. But then in the early 2010s, Chess.com created a TV station through Chess.com. And they hired me to do that, and I did that for a couple years. And my show there, my TV show on chess.com was called Q&A with Coach Heisman. So I actually worked for both ICC, and I did about 400 videos for ICC or 300 or 400, before I've done my current 400 for my YouTube channel, Dan Heisman Chess, which is the one you're listening to now. So I had done hundreds of videos for ICC, and I had done the radio show, and then for chess.com, I did the Q&A with Coach Heisman and did some articles for them and articles and blogs, and I still have the articles and blogs from my chess.com stuff on my website. So I was involved with both. And in fact, the only time I've ever visited the Statue of Liberty was I was invited up to New York City by Danny Rensch, the author of the book, and They invited me up there when I was doing the TV show, and I met a lot of their programmers. They were in a big meeting there in New York, and then after the meeting, they decided to all go over to the Statue of Liberty on a ferry, and they asked my wife Shelley and I if I wanted to go, and we said sure, and we went there, and that was the only time I've ever been to the Statue of Liberty was with the Chess.com group. Anyway, back to the book. The next thing that Danny talks about in the book is how engines became so good at chess And he goes into a little of the history with Deep Blue. I worked at both the Kasparov Deep Blue matches myself. He goes into a little of the history and then talks about how chess became so good in everybody's phone that it was so easy to cheat, and how people would put electronic devices on their body so that they could get signal messages from their friends who were watching the game and could send them the moves, and they could cheat in over the board tournaments. And of course, people could cheat online very easily. And he talked about the differences between the ICC cheating detection algorithms and the chess.com detection algorithms. Doesn't go into detail, of course, because he doesn't want to give away exactly how they do it. But he said because they had so many millions of games, in fact, I would guess by now it might be billions of games on chess.com, they had an unprecedented capability to study these games and see what the differences were between people playing like normal humans and what happens when people cheat. And they got a tremendous amount of data on that, which enabled them to create very, very sophisticated anti-cheating capabilities, software to detect cheating. And they became very, very good at detecting cheating. And Danny goes into the history of how they dealt with that they normally would hide it. And if someone cheated, they would confront them quietly. They wouldn't do it publicly. They did make one exception. When people started complaining that chess.com wasn't doing enough about the cheating, they decided to make someone an example, and they did make it public. And Danny regretted that and said it was a really big mistake. They should never have done that. And from then on, they kept everything really kind of quiet, which leads up to sort of the culmination of the book, which is that Hans Niemann, the young American grandmaster, when he was young, he had cheated, not just apparently on chess.com, but he had cheated on chess.com, and they knew about it. And they had, for a while, they had banned him. And then when he came back and he was playing and he was getting stronger and stronger, eventually at the Sinkfeld Cup, I guess it was, 2022, he beat Carlsen, and his answers after the game, when they asked him about the game, normally grandmasters love to say, well, I saw this and I saw that and he missed this and I got this and I was able to do this. But Niemann's answers were very strange, and that led people to think that, you don't just beat Magnus Carlsen every day, even if you're an average grandmaster. And Niemann became a stronger grandmaster, but at the time he was not one of the top players in the world. Now he's maybe roughly around 20th, but at the time he wasn't. And he beat Carlsen, and Carlsen thought he acted rather strange during the game, and his answers after the game were rather strange, which led everybody to think possibly he was cheating in some way in this over-the-board game. So that led to the prologue of the book, where Carlsen's father, after the game, had called Danny Rensch to ask him what chess.com knew about Niemann's cheating history. And eventually what happened is chess.com had to ban Niemann from their next Grandmaster tournament because all the other Grandmasters complained that there wasn't doing enough about preventing cheating, and until they could clear things up and prevent over-the-board cheating better, that kind of thing, they wanted to at least hold off playing against Niemann for a while. And chess.com reluctantly agreed to do that, and that led Niemann to sue Magnus Carlsen. He sued chess.com. He sued Hikaru Nakamura, Grandmaster Nakamura, because he commented on that on social media and so on. So there was a big lawsuit that had to be eventually, part of it was thrown out of court, but the other part of it eventually, I think, was settled out of court in any case. So they go into all that. So that's kind of the total sum of the book. But the interesting part of the book, I mean, for me, I knew a lot about the chess cheating. I knew a lot about the rise of chess.com. I didn't know the inside stuff, so that was interesting. But the cult stuff I knew nothing about. And I think from looking at the way Danny wrote the book, which was very well written, by the way, and there was a lot of interludes there to talking about, the growth of computer chess and stuff like that. It's well put together. It's well written. I don't know if Danny wrote the whole thing himself or he had a help with a ghostwriter. I don't know. I assume he wrote it himself since I didn't see anything. But it's well written. It's well laid out. It's interesting. It's you don't read it and say gee, why am I going to the next page? But it is a nonfiction book, and the important stuff to me was the cult stuff, because I know a lot about the other stuff, but the cult stuff I didn't know anything about, and it was a lot of the book is interpersonal relationships. It's about how Danny interacted with his biological father, with the people who took him away from his mother, with his siblings, with his half-siblings, and how the cult treated him. And a lot of it is his growth as a person, because, you know, he bought into all this because he was born into it. And when you're born into it, you buy into it. And so he didn't really question it when he was young. And it wasn't until he got older and he got more exposed to the outside world. That's what happens when you go play in a million chess tournaments and you start to grow up and you go away and you do things. And as he got exposed to the outside world and he met his wife and he got married and all this stuff, he began to look at the cult from a more objective standpoint. But it took him a long, long time to do that, to see what some of the abuse was that he had suffered from. And a lot of things happened to him. For instance, that in the cult, they didn't watch your ears. They didn't watch your health as closely. You know, you only went to the doctor if there was something wrong. You didn't go for preventative stuff. You didn't go to the dentist for preventative teeth cleaning, things like that. And he ended up with terrible problems with his ears. And because he was flying to chess tournaments, which put also pressure on his ears, and his ears were never really fixed, he ended up getting a very severe incident with his ears. And he's never been 100%. He was lucky to retain his hearing, and he's never been 100% with that. So we go into all the detail about all these things, which are really a big part of the book. So I do highly recommend the book. You know, if you have a book club, you know, you might want to do it that way also. But again, it's called Dark Squares, subtitle How Chess Saved My Life, by Danny Rensch. And I recommend it. It's a good read, and even if you listen to my whole podcast here, which is actually a video, of course, I'm sure you will enjoy the book as well, because the interest in the book is in the details. It's not really, you know, gee, I wonder what's going to happen here. It's not like a fictional mystery and I'm giving away the end game. All right, thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.